Welcome to What If We Can Change It All, the podcast.
A podcast created by Movement.Medicine.
My name is Shadisa.
And my name is Janina.
We believe that we have the power and therefore we can change it all.
This podcast is all about reclaiming your power. Before we start today's episode, we wanted to give you guys a little trigger warning. In this episode, we will talk about a traumatic birth experience, and since we are not a birthing podcast, we wanted to give you a little heads up. That was it for now. Enjoy the episode. Hello, lovely people, and welcome to our next episode, a new episode actually. We are here again with our lovely Liv, and she is going to finish her amazing story today. So we are actually really excited to hear the rest, although we know a lot already, but we want to hear the rest in details. So she needs no introduction, of course. If you haven't seen or listened to our last episode, the English is not here today. If you haven't listened to our last episode, please do so. And for the rest, enjoy the ride.
Maybe.
Okay, shall I just continue the story? Okay. So on the last episode, we just parked it where I had realized that my work as a pharmacist was no longer sustainable, and I was pregnant now with my daughter, and just being in full trust that whatever was going to happen was going to happen. And also, it's funny, even though I was 28 years old when I had that positive pregnancy test, I remember my cycle was late, and at this point I was like synced with the moon, 100%, 28 days, bam bam bam. And then I remember I was late, and 1 or 2 days I just had this really subtle wave of nausea, and then just my body started to feel different, and I was just I knew immediately in my body. I was I'm pregnant. And I remember going to the pharmacy, and so much came up, it's because I had worked in a pharmacist, and all those times when I had these interactions with women buying pregnancy tests, I'm oh, I wonder what she's feeling. I wonder, is this a, because some women are just so hoping for those two lines, or that pregnant to flash up, and other women are oh my goodness, if I'm pregnant now, that's going to change a lot of things for me. So even though I was 28 and obviously able to create a position for myself to take care of a baby, my body was still responding as if I was 16 and pregnant, that was the visceral feeling of being oh my God. And even just I could feel all of this kind of shame bubbling up, even when I was going to the pharmacist and buying the pregnancy test. And it was just totally surreal. And also just even being a customer in a pharmacy was such an alien feeling to me at the time. So it was good, it was an interesting role reversal to just be in that moment. And the test was positive, and it was just I was just okay, I guess this is happening now. And we weren't really we weren't really in a settled place. We were living in Ireland, in rented accommodation, which we didn't really have a contract, so we didn't know what the longevity of that would be. Also, I decided I wasn't going to continue working, and my Theo was here. Theo was here in Canada, also not working, but trying to get his offering up and going. So it's kind of we need to make a plan here, and the plan was really to stay in Ireland for as long as we could at that moment. And then in between all of this, Theo had to return to Canada because he had orthodontics, and he was he was traveling a lot that year when we met, and he was okay, I have to go back and sort this out, and then I'll be back. And it was December time. And this was the first, the instincts that kick in your body are just wild. So even though logically and mentally I knew that he was going to Canada to have orthodontics sorted, and then he was coming back, I was staying in Ireland alone, pregnant, with her child, and like just like that embodied feeling. It was like panic, and like just to be separated from him in this vulnerable moment just like felt so wrong. But like that really opened up in me this realization that that was a pattern that I had. You know, it's like I'm having this physiological, biological response to this situation, and then I'm talking myself down on a mental level because that's more logical, or like makes more sense, or basically is more convenient for everybody else except maybe me, right? So that was an interesting moment. So Theo went, and then I was like, as soon as he left, I was like, no, like staying in Ireland is not like the right option for me. Like I think that I should just like go to Canada. And in this moment, it was when it was like peak, it's like, you know, cold and flu season, peak pandemic. Um, it was right when they were bringing in all of like the PCR testing, which you would need to travel. Um, Canada was closed to tourists, so we had to like do loads of paperwork for me to be able to go, including like proving like that our relationship was real and stuff, which was very funny. And then it was like me. Theo also thought he was coming back, so then it's like me, like 7 weeks pregnant, packing up all of our belongings, trying to find a flight where my luggage would go through all of the way, and then somehow time that with having my test results within, you know, like the 72 hours or whatever the rule was at the time, and waiting on a lawyer to sign paperwork so I could get approved to go across the border. There's a lot going on, and it was very stressful, you know, like I just found out I was pregnant, and then I was doing all this stuff, and also feeling super tired and like super sick. And yeah, so basically it all like fell into place eventually. And I think it was like in January I found myself on the way to Canada. And it's like when I look back now, I just feel so much like love and compassion for like that version of me who just like packed her bags and like went like vulnerably like pregnant on an airplane into like a country and a house like where I'd never been before, you know? Like that was really big. And I think at the time I didn't really like calculate enough like for myself, like the toll of that or what that really meant. And like also because of just like the situation, like I didn't know when I'd be able to go back to Ireland because of like one being pregnant, and that's such a big long journey, and two, just what was happening in terms of COVID. Like I didn't know if I was going to ever see my grandparents again, you know, if all four of them were alive. So there was like I had to go through a lot of like grieving like in that moment, like because like I was leaving indefinitely and I didn't know when I was going to be back, as I said. So that was kind of like that was what I was like. I was sitting on that plane for like 14 hours or however long the flight is, and like just kind of mulling all of this over. And so like I arrived to Canada and like everything is going super well. I'm like, wow, I got through all those lineups like so easily, and like all my paperwork has been fine. And then I was just waiting for my luggage to come out, and it all came out, and like all I had to do was like go out the door. And so I'm going up, and there's like that one final customs check. And they were just like, oh, like, so you came, like, this was the route that you took, and like, this is the stuff that you have, which is basically all Theo and I's belongings. And it included this, like, his bike, which was like a pain because I'm now like pregnant trying to like haul this, like, you know, oversized peak of luggage onto this like trolley. And I'm like, wheeling it out, being like so cheerful that like I'd made it and that like all the bits were there. And then they hauled me into customs basically, and they were just like, who owns all this stuff? Where are you coming from? What's in this box? They made me open the box, and then they're like, so where, they asked me like where this bike was being ridden. It was covered in dirt, and basically they decided that Theo's bike was like a threat to like the entire agriculture of Canada because it was muddy. So they're like, there's two options. Like you can pay us like 500 Canadian dollars, and we can have it cleaned, or you can clean it now.
Oh wow.
Oh, wow.
And then I was just like, this was already like my, like by the time all we had gotten to this point, like Theo was like in the lobby with these like drooping flowers waiting for me for like 2 hours. So I
Oh.
was just like in the customs thing, wearing like PPE with some cleaning solution, scrubbing his bike, being like, okay, like what the hell is going on? And I was just like trying to clean it as quickly as possible so we could get through. And then I was like so mad by the time that I got through. I literally like I could barely like talk to him. I was like, I'm so annoyed, even though I hadn't seen him in ages, and like it was like me coming to Canada, and it was like another airport story, you know. Then we like go to the car park, we get in the car, and we're driving, and I'm not sure if it's on your guys' radar, but here in Vancouver, there's a part of the city called the Downtown East Side, and it's where like just like mental health issues and addiction and like homelessness sort of converge into this like really challenging and like heartbreaking issue. And it's just like a lot of houseless people like deep in addiction, and they're basically like living on the street, and I had never really seen that level of what that is. And like we're driving through this, and I'm literally like, oh my goodness, like what is like what's going on here, like who are these people, like where have they come from, like what's going on with them. And so that was like another kind of shock. And then we're almost at his house and his car breaks down.
Oh.
And I'm like, universe, help me out here, you know, as in like, if these are the signs, then like I'm afraid, you know. I'm
Mm.
afraid. And like I remember just like arriving, like eventually we got rescued by his dad and his brother, and then eventually we got to the house, and like his whole family, this was like peak COVID, so like but his whole family were still there. They had made this sign for me being like, welcome Olivia and baby. um they had cooked this big huge dinner, and like I was vegan at the time, and then his dad kept trying to like feed me lamb. You know, he had like cooked this lamb especially for me. He just decided to ignore that I was like vegan, and was like, "Oh yeah, like I made you this lamb." And then I was just like, "Oh man, like you know that whole like situation where like you're like vegan and then somebody makes you something and you're like, I really appreciate the effort you've gone to, but like I don't eat that." And it's like straight away into like just like being the new person in the family and the dynamics and like the vulnerability. It was just so much. It was just so much. So then the next thing that we were trying to do was like navigate the healthcare system here, because I basically arrived like as a tourist and didn't have any other status here. So we basically decided that like, you know, we were engaged anyway, like let's get married because that's going to like accelerate like everything. So we had to like in like a week plan like a wedding, which was hilarious because we like I was like, wow, I had such like plans for like our wedding, you know, when we got engaged, and now like it's going to be this. So it was in his mother's in his mother's, I guess, like front room of the house, and there was like 10 people there. We had like a celebrant. Um my whole family were on Zoom, and I had like managed to like get a dress. Also like I was like 12 or 13 weeks pregnant at this point. So like trying to find a dress as a pregnant lady, it's like also very loaded in terms of like my like Irish Catholic upbringing, right? I'm like the pregnant bride. And just like yeah, find like trying to go shopping and finding a dress and like all of this, but we managed to pull it together. And we had actually already written our vows before we were even married, like just you know in India, and we I still had them, and those actually ended up being the vows that we like shared on the day. And
Oh.
I had also brought some like water from like the river Ganga, like just a tiny amount to take home with me, and that was like on our altar on the day as well. So it was really nice. And you know it just like was what it was. And like in the time I was just like grateful to be able to have the ceremony that we had, but like in retrospect it's like I really wish that my family could have been there in person. So I guess we'll just have to have another wedding like at some point in the future. So we got married, and then we were like trying to figure out, okay, like I need, like I want to like have some like what healthcare do I need here, like in terms of like the pregnancy. And like at this point I was like very sure that I did not want like care from a doctor. I wanted care from a midwife based on everything I'd learned in my prenatal yoga teacher training. And like I was deep in like the midwifery, like books, like reading everything about natural birth, everything about prenatal yoga. And like midwifery care seemed to be like where it was at, like having a wise woman there with you to like witness you go through this rite of passage and to be with you like in this time when your baby's growing and like your fears and anxieties are coming up, and like having somebody to hold the space for that. That's truly what I wanted. So even from Ireland, I had like contacted like every midwifery practice in our area, and I guess it was the same in Ireland, but like there was like a baby boom, and they all the practices were full. And also because I didn't have like health coverage or whatever, they wouldn't take me because I would have to pay out of pocket, and they're like used to not like getting paid for that or whatever. So we ended up finding a midwife and then paying her out of pocket. And when I say we found a midwife, there was like one who was willing to take us on. So like we went to her office, and there was just like so many things. Like the first appointment she made it for a day and time that like she wasn't actually there. And I was like, okay, I'm like here for midwifery. And then the woman was like, oh, like she's not here today. And I was like, oh, like that's kind of weird because we made an appointment for today. And then we tried to go for the second appointment, and she was at a birth and like didn't contact us. And I was kind of like, okay, like if she can't, like if this person can't turn up for like two appointments, like how can I haven't even met her, and like how can I trust her to like be there for me in the birth, and like this was the only midwife that would take me on. So like that was really hard, that felt like very vulnerable and scary. Um so then I just kind of had to like go along with that. Well, from that point of view, I felt like all I had to do was go along with that until I couldn't. So we had a few more meetings, and like with each and every meeting, like with the questions I was asking her, it just became more and more clear that like this was not this was not going to work. I told her what my preferences were, like for the birth. Like I didn't want to have any vaginal exams during like my birth. It was my preference for her to be like as hands off as possible. I wasn't going to be calling her until I really felt like the baby was almost coming. And when I asked her for those things, like we got a letter in the mail to say that she had terminated her care with us. So she basically dropped my care. I was like 32 weeks pregnant. She dropped my care because she thought that like she said that there was like a breach of trust, which is basically I wouldn't go along with what she wanted to do to my body in my house, And it's like she like in Canada, the midwives are part of the healthcare system, and it's like a social system. So like you don't actually pay for midwifery care. Now I did because of my coverage issue, but what I mean is like they're regulated by the government, like they work for the government. They don't actually work for women and their families. So like they have to by making that choice, they have to like, maintain their license, which requires them to do stuff. And if you don't want that, that's scary for them. And it was also like COVID, so they were also like dealing with all of that, like not making excuses for them, but like that was the reality of like the extent that like this midwife was willing to go to give me the care that I wanted. Like she was not willing. So yeah, I'm like 32 weeks pregnant, like in this country with like nobody to like see me through the birth. And like I was just like, I did like, what do I do? So my doula was a friend called Brianna, and I had actually met her in Bali at the women's health training I'd done with Women Wellness. And I remember her telling me that she was a doula and she lived in Vancouver. And then I found myself like pregnant in Vancouver and needing a doula. So she was my person. And I asked her to I can like try to find somebody that would work with me, Um and she did. Like she came through with this birth keeper, and a birth keeper like she was a traditional birth attendant, which means that she was like outside of the medical system. So she was able to basically like meet me wherever I wanted to be met. And like the relief when I met this lady, and like every week she like came to my home like to do the appointments. I didn't have to leave. Every week we were just like talking about like the spiritual like journey that birth was going to be. Um she would give me like foot massages. We would talk about like undisturbed, like physiological birth, exactly the way that like I knew to be the best way for me and my baby to like work through this. And yeah, basically like it went on like that, and I was so excited to like have her be my person. So then like my due date came and went. In Canada, they give like at 40 weeks, that's like the guest date that they give you for when your baby's going to come. And then 41 weeks came and went, and then 42 weeks came and went. And like in the like kind of natural birthing circles, like you would hear of women who could be pregnant 44 or 45 weeks. But like within the medical system, like you would never be allowed to go like past like 42 weeks or whatever. So even though I knew that, there was still some like fears coming up or like anxieties coming up, mostly because like I was gearing up to meet my baby more or less in and around my due date, and I was still pregnant for 2 more weeks, and people who had that I had met like in online groups or whatever, their due dates were like after mine, and they had already met their babies, and I was like, when is this baby going to come? And it's also like randomly a really hot summer. Like one day it was like 42 degrees Celsius here, and I'm like so pregnant. Like I'm like swollen and like puffy, and it's so uncomfortable. I'm not sleeping, and it's like, when is this baby going to get here? So it was like a Monday morning, and I think I was just like, okay, like this baby's never coming. Like I'm going to be pregnant forever. Um thought that I was going to have a baby, but no, this is just like my state now, I give up. And my husband was still like, he was working the whole time, because I was like, we had planned for him to like take a month off so he could like support me in my becoming of a mother, and also like in him becoming a father, and just like our family unit just becoming what it was, our family unit being born. And he was just gonna like work, he just kept working because I was still pregnant. But he stopped working on the Friday, and then the Monday, it was that night that I actually went into labor. So it's like my body was like waiting for him almost. Like that's kind of my like understanding. Um and my body went into labor that night. So I was just lying in bed, and I remember getting up to pee, because that's kind of for the past month I was getting up to pee like 3 times in the night. So I got up to pee, and then there was just sort of this like gush of water, and I was like, oh my god, like my water's broke. That's so random, because I didn't have any like sensations or anything at that point. And I know, like, in movies and stuff, like it's always this dramatic like gush of water. It's like the baby's coming, or like that's how women go into labor. But like I think in reality, I think it's only like 10% of women actually begin labor with their waters breaking. So um yeah, I just like I let the birth attendant and my doula know that like the waters were broken, and like I just went back to bed. And then the next few days were just like I was having like sensations on and off all day, and then they would pick up all night, and then I'd wake up in the morning, it's like, okay, I'm still pregnant, like there's no baby here. And then the next day, like I had called the doula and like my birth attendant to come, and just like, because I didn't know what was going on, it was my first time, I was like, is this normal, like what's going on? And yeah, I mean, like I was like writing the sensations, and I was like experiencing them, but like they were just kind of like at this like intensity level where I was like coping well, but like they weren't really getting to the place of like zero fucks given, as my doula would like say later. um and I was in this place where like I had asked not to have vaginal exams, and now I had somebody who wouldn't do them as part of their practice, and I was very confused about like like, am I actually in labor? You know, it's such like a mind game of like, am I in labor because this has been happening and like I still don't have a baby and it's like not as intense as I thought it would. And like I was still having to cope actively with each sensation, but like there wasn't like the progress, I guess, that like I was expecting or that the birth attendant was expecting or even my doula was expecting. It was just like a slower process. And then my like we had been rolling with the sensations for a while, and I think in the background the birth attendant was timing some of them so she could kind of get an indication of like where I was at, like this was her method. And so she just decided, she's like, are you feeling pushy? And I'm just like, no, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know what that means. Like, my body's not pushing, so I don't feel pushy. I don't understand. And she's like, oh, you can try pushing. So like I did that for a while, and then she like got a torch and a mirror and she was like looking and she was like, "Oh my God, I can see the head." And I was like, "What? Like this is crazy. Like my baby's going to be born." And then I was just like pushing and 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 like doing all these different positions, like up on the bed on all fours, like hanging on Theo, like bending over, like everything to like try and help the baby like come down and out. And this was like I was already in like my third day of labor. Like this was like Thursday. I gone into like my waters broke the Monday night, and I had like gone into like this was Thursday evening, and like with the next like gush like of fluids, it was like really thick dark brown meconium, which is like the stool that the baby passes. And like my baby was 42 weeks, so it's like it would be very normal for like a baby that mature to like have meconium in the waters, like that's a known thing. But this was like super thick, like, you know, pea soup appearance is what it was like. And at this point, like I was exhausted. Like I had been pushing for like 8 whole hours, like squat, like holding on to the change table, like that we had for the baby, like looking at the clothes that we were gonna like dress them in to try and like, just build like the oxytocin and like for me to like feel into the connection of the baby. And like I could barely walk. I had stopped like peeing and then I couldn't pee. My bladder was too full. And basically, like, I started, like, I felt like I was having a fever and I was just super exhausted. And then Theo said that, like, I think, like, we need to actually move this to the hospital because it's been 3 days and you're exhausted. And now this, like, meconium has come out and we, like, my birth attendant was checking the baby's heart rate and, like, it was fine. But, like, we just kind of got to the point where we had decided to go. And like when I'm telling the story now, it's like it kind of like doesn't like make a lot of sense based on what I know now. But like I literally like I could not go on because I wasn't really even though I was trying really hard to rest and sleep, like I was still going through sensations for like 3 whole days and I was exhausted. And then we moved to the hospital. And because of COVID, like the birth attendant like wasn't allowed in, but my doula was, so she stayed with me. And then I consented to a vaginal exam because I didn't know which way was up. Like I was in labor for 3 days. My birth attendant told me that my baby was about to be born if I just pushed hard enough. And then when the doctor checked me, I was only 6 centimeters, and like, you need to be like 10 to dilate before the baby comes down, is like how it goes. So I was like, how? And my cervix was completely swollen because I had pushed before I was fully dilated. So now I had obstructed my own labor. My cervix was swollen. We used some drugs to try to like open my cervix so I could still have a vaginal birth, but I had been on that medication for like 12 hours and my cervix would not open like 1 more centimeter. And that drug caused Fia's heart rate to like decline because it's like synthetic oxytocin, so like it makes the uterus like squeeze like really hard to try and get the baby out, and it's obviously stressful for them. So Fia was saying like, no, like this is not working for me. And like my cervix wouldn't open anymore. And then the doctor was like, okay, like we are recommending that you have a C-section. And like I'm literally like what the actual fuck. Like, I really thought that I did like every single step to, I like stayed outside of the birth system. Like, I first of all, I had midwife, which is like the apparently the biggest thing that you can do to like not, have that intervention. It's not like I was walking into the hospital with a doctor going to be part of the cascade. And then I had like a doula, which is also supposed to help. I stayed out of the hospital for as long as possible. I was like coping so well. Like, it wasn't even the pain or intensity that was the issue. It was like the exhaustion and the lack of rest, and that I wasn't able to have. And that's where I was like, looking at this consent form, being like, how can I like give consent to this? Um so we ended up like going along like with that. And then I had no hospital bag pack, so I didn't have any of my stuff with me. I didn't really have a birth plan for the hospital except to like decline everything. But now I was in a position where like I was being asked all these questions. It's like I don't even like have a reference point for any of this, because it was just so off the table for me to be like having this conversation. And then my doula left to get some rest, because she had also been up for like 2 or 3 days. And then I ended up going into like the operating theater early, um because like there was just like a change in schedule, so she actually missed like the birth. But at least my husband was like with me, and like that actually turned out better in the end. And like, I mean, I had to get like lots of pain relief like preoperatively. They missed the sighting getting my epidural. The epidural didn't take. um they didn't check my pain relief between me leaving the hospital room and being in the theater. They started opening me up and I wasn't fully numb, so then I had to get another like pain relief. And I just could not feel my body at all. And I just remember lying there being like, like it was like so surreal. I was like, I can't believe that this is like happening to me, was the language. I felt so victimized in the situation. And my daughter was born, like she was fine. I could hear her like screaming, and I was like, that noise of like, okay, like she's okay. And it literally felt like forever before somebody brought her to my chest. I'm like, where's my baby? Where's my baby? Where's my baby? Like, here she is now. Yeah, there's my baby. And she, hi, hi. She came. I miss you too. um, she came to my chest, and she was just this like little pink, like flame-haired little cherub, and I was like, oh my god, like I was not expecting to have a little redhead. And it's like just holding the experience of like kind of like horror and terror and shock, with also like just the disbelief of that she was finally here after such an ordeal. So I remember just like at this point like rolodexing in my mind, and like everything that I had learned through my like deep dive into natural birth was like, oh my goodness, like I haven't given birth vaginally. I've had so much drugs that I didn't want. Am I going to be able to breastfeed at this point? And I had spent the last weeks of my pregnancy like hand expressing my colostrum, just because it seemed to be like amazingly beneficial for the immune system, whether you were going to give it to the baby or not. Like I was like, for myself, if like I have a cold, I'm going to take a shot of colostrum. So I was so glad that I had done that, just like mentally. But even in the recovery, like she just like, for all of the drugs that like went in my system, she was so alert, so awake. She found her way to the breast, she latched on, she was just like a champion like breastfeeder from the start. And we were in the hospital just like getting to know each other, breastfeeding, and just like trying to process everything that happened. And there was construction in the floor below, so like at 8 a.m. They're like drilling like all day long, and I was like, I need to get out of here, like I need to get out of this place. um but that night, Fia, like her heart rate was like a little bit lower than they were hoping, and also her body temperature like wasn't as high as they were hoping. And like I was doing lots of skin to skin with her, and then she was like sleeping in the bassinet. Like my intentions were to co-sleep and do all of these things, but the experience of like transferring in the way that I did made me question absolutely everything about like my birth plan, how I wanted to become a mother, co-sleeping. It's like, was I just wrong about everything? It really just like affected my confidence so much, and it took me like so long to get that back. This is the woman herself. Yeah.
I
So, um, yeah, so they came back and like monitored her again, and they basically came to this conclusion that she had an infection, and like that she had to go to like the baby ICU, which meant like us being separated. And I was like, I thought that like I was out of the woods now in terms of like all of the interventions and everything, and it was just like going to a whole new level. Um, and so like deeply intuitively, I knew that she was well, but also I was like the terror of like what I just experienced, and like the like lack of confidence, as I said, like I just found myself going along with it because I didn't know what else I could actually do. And like, at this point, like no doula, like the birth keeper, like called me in tears saying that she's worried that she ruined my birth by making me push too soon. I was like, you think? And also it's like I've literally just come around from being on drugs from the surgery, like is now the best time to be calling me. So she ended up staying in the neonatal ICU for 5 days in total. I went in for basically every feed, like all night. I refused to be discharged until we were able to be in a room together, which we were for the last night. I did go home for one night to have a shower and stuff, but like just leaving the hospital without her, like, I was just like, everything was wrong. It was all wrong. And like all to say that like that experience like really cracked me open like in a whole new way. And it's like, so much like for me, it's like so much of the spiritual journey has been going deeper and deeper into realizations like of my past and putting the pieces together. But this time it was like feeling all of this happen to me live, and like it felt like all the wisdom I had on my spiritual journey was just so like redundant because of the magnitude of this. It's like I barely had, even though I had like practiced all of these tools during my pregnancy, it's like in these moments, like I just had nothing. I had nothing to help me cope except because I was just like so shocked. And yeah, like that event, like I said, has just like set me on a whole like different path of inquiry. Like, there's this saying that like you don't often get the birth that you want, you get the birth that you need. And like that was so like that's still hard for me to accept. I was just at like a book reading of like um basically like a hero author of mine who wrote a book on birth, and she speaks about like choice. And it's like, you know, you got the birth that you also chose, and like while I accept that on the mental level, it feels like so triggering on my body to know like how could I choose that? But it's also not me, it's like me, like all of me, the higher self of me. It's not just me having this experience. And yeah, it's been a huge deep dive into like choice, like the influence, like the people that you allow into your space, um, safety in my body, what that means, how trauma shows up for me in my body. Like, what I'm really with now is just like people pleasing. Like, really thought that I had done so much work on that, and then just like being shown through all these experience, like how much work there is still to do there. Like, it's honestly like humbling. And yeah, I'm still like, even though like I conceived another baby and also planned a home birth with registered midwives, and like saw all the red flags and thought that I needed their help to prevent what happened the last time, I ended up, instead of like having this redemptive home birth, I ended up like having a repeat cesarean, which was just like another like shock. So like the becoming a mother in meeting my babies, in like the experiences that I have like moved through to get them, doing the best that I can, like the best way I know how. Like it's been like there is a lot of like trauma from those experiences, and like I'm still really working with my nervous system like very actively to try and like overcome that, and like even just understanding like how birth trauma even shows up. Like for me, it was like, you know, not feeling like I'm able to keep my baby safe in the world. You know, it's like I have this toddler who's like running around, and then I have this baby like strapped to my chest, and like my toddler is like climbing, and I'm just like feeling so vulnerable, and feeling like I can't keep her safe to like the external events in the world, like everything that's happening like on a global scale. It's just this feeling of like, you know, like that I'm like in somehow incapable or like not able to like mother effectively. And I know that that is like so related to like the incompletion that I experienced in like the pregnancy and births. And that's something that I'm seeing and working with. And yeah, it's just like it's honestly just opened up like a huge a new healing path, because I feel like when I met Theo and we couldn't see Fia, I was like, you know, like you've done so much healing work and you've integrated, and now you're like, oh, I'm like on a peak now. You know, it's like I've integrated so much stuff, I've like figured something out. I like have like just a trampoline to bounce off of into like just knowing what's going on, and like being really active and able to materialize things and just like work with flow, to like this just like dark night of the soul experience that now I'm only like barely coming off. But it's also like knowing that it's going to like a new peak also, but it's like having such a big spiritual initiation again so soon is like so much. And that is like the whole team here for me is like pace, like everything's happening too fast, but I'm giving birth too slowly. You know, like everything is going, the time is going so fast, but like I'm still pregnant for 42 weeks. You know, there's like rhythm and pace in there that are big lessons for me. um
But I
I've
also think that's like really beautiful also to share this, right? Because it also still means that we always can like find like little gems in it, right? Like as you said, like although it might be hard to accept right now, like you believe that you got the birth that you were needed to have, right? But at the same time, it also meant that you deep down were also ready to fully experience this and to get the lessons out of this. And I think that also shows a lot of strength and a lot of power that you actually have. And
Mhm.
although it might not feel like that because it was not planned and it was not what you wanted, um, it really showed, and also showed us, but also yourself, like how powerful you actually are, right?
Yeah.
And how incredible we as women also can be.
Mhm.
It really shows your power, your also your strength now by sharing all of this now, right? It's an
Yeah.
intimate thing to share and you just shared it. I mean, that's already like powerful and brave.
And it's really hard also as like somebody that is like very holistic minded, like largely outside of the medical system, like thinking I'm going to have this natural birth and being in that circle, to then being like that mom that had like a cesarean, and then also mirroring back my own judgments to me that I was holding about women who had those types of births before I experienced it, you know. And it's like it's so much that way. And like it's so interesting that you use the words like strong and powerful, because like like the action, really the opposite was like the experience for me. Like I feel powerless, like i feel like I feel like a victim, and I feel like victimized by this whole thing, and I just feel so weak. And like the fact that I couldn't bring, like that was my thing. I was like, I couldn't bring my baby into the world in the way that I had dreamed of. Like that was like so heartbreaking for me, and like still is. And also like the fact that you have used the words like acceptance is huge, because it's like in my unraveling of my birth stories, it's like I've come to realize that like I had a lot of resistance to being in Canada. I had a lot of resistance to like, you know, being in the living situation that we're in. I had a lot of resistance to like being just a mom. Like I was like, I'm a mom, but like I'm also trying to build my offering, and it's like my offering is my motherhood. Like that is my offering, you know? That's my offering, to like be present and like regulated and be like the mom that my kids like need me to be, even though like even like despite how their births were, like for me and for them too, because obviously it was an experience for them. And yeah, just like really like acceptance has been like the huge lesson for me. And like acceptance and like resistance being the two like poles,
Yeah.
you know, like what is this resistance, and like knowing that like resistance can be helpful, but also resistance is like, are you like the helpful resistance, or are you like an old pattern dying kind of resistance? And like, can I actually accept, like what this resistance is trying to tell me? And with my son and the labor that I had with him, which was also like a 48-hour like affair before me being like, before like me realizing and like thinking that like we were in a dangerous situation and taking the steps I needed to move out of that. Um, that was from that labor experience. It's like, wow, I'm like a little hard ball of resistance and rage. And like, how do I become soft again? Because like I said, my first healing journey was my like first initiation to softness. I'm like, wow, it's so much easier to live your life from a place of softness. But then understand, like realizing like how much resistance and residual whatever it is still left in me based on how like those sensations and how that also unfolded for me. So yeah, it's big stuff, and like it is vulnerable to share. Again, like it's hard for me, like, because I'm like a birth worker, I'm a womb worker, like that's who I am. And like I find myself in these circles of like free birthing, homeschooling, homesteading women, and I'm like, I know that you're my people, but then I'm like the one who had like the really, you know, the crazy, like not the crazy, but like these heavily, like the most interventions that you can possibly have, and I have to like hold that as my story. And I want to say try to be proud of it, but like that doesn't make any sense. But like that's what happened. Like that's my story. That's how my babies came here. And it's like I feel a lot like of like judgment and guilt and shame, not like from these people, but just me projecting that onto myself, and like not feeling like I belong with these women, or you know, there's all of these things that come up in like me being who I am, like in that space. And like that's my work now, is to try and yeah, be in acceptance, and like also try to understand what the gift is in there, you know. There's still so much.
Yeah, and
So
I can also imagine that there are a lot of women that already like have so much receive so much medicine by just listening to this and like just witnessing your story and seeing how you actually developed by it, right? I think that's really, 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 really beautiful.
Yeah, and I think it's also important that we share stories like this, right? And that sometimes we plan a home birth and things are not going how we planned, but that we can still work through it, and that there can be someone else to hold us, and that's there doesn't have to be shame. And I can imagine that it's different when you experienced it, because I didn't, right? But I think it is something you can be proud of, and also for all the other women out there that experience something else than they planned for, or in what kind of way, like in motherhood, during the pregnancy, during giving birth. I think you can always be proud of yourself. You're doing like absolutely amazing, being there, taking responsibility for another human being, and doing your best.
Yeah. So to kind of make it to an end, what would your ultimate tip be for our listeners?
my ultimate tip would be just to know your own power.
Mm.
And yeah, like what comes up for me is like I am afraid of my own power and how big it is. So it's like when you feel like, I know that's like a common experience, but like when that's like what's coming up, like pay attention.
Mm,
Oh,
that's really
goosebumps.
beautiful.
Pay attention. Yeah.
Thank
because
you.
like, obviously, like when I look back at the stories, it's like, it's like the what ifing, and it's like I remember the moments of intuition and the moments that I paid attention to, and still ultimately wasn't able to like allow that to be my authority because of like fear and conditioning. And like I can't change that now. I can only like move forward like with that wisdom. So yeah, that's it. Thank you so much.
I think that's a beautiful one to end it with. We truly want to thank you for being so open, so honest, but also so vulnerable and like sharing your story.
So brave.
So brave also. Yeah, we highly appreciate you, and you know that we love you. Um,
Love
we
you too.
we will put all your details in the description. I always mix the two of them, subscription and description, but we will put all your info there so people can find you. And again, thank you so much. And for the listeners, we will see you next week. Bye bye.
Thank you.